I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
President, colleagues, I would like to start my statement with some condolences to the government of Mali following the terrorist act on the 7th of September, as a result of which 48 civilians died and 15 military. This is a tragedy that clearly shows how important international community it needs to overcome divergences and prioritise supporting the Malian authorities in their efforts to build peace and support peace across the country. Unfortunately, this logic did not prevail by the French pen holders and other Western members of the Security Council when we considered the sanctions regime on Mali, which intended to ignore the legitimate requirements of the Malian people themselves. I would recall that on the 16th of August, the Council officially turned to Mali with a requirement to abolish the sanctions regime. And this request had convincing arguments saying that restrictions from the Security Council were no longer relevant. No less important, the sanctions regime against this country was approved by the Council in 2017, indeed in a response to an official request by the Malian government. Russia consistently advocates against preserving endless automatic extensions of sanctions regime of the Security Council. They should be targeted and have a limited time frame and help a resolution and not be used as an external leverage of pressure. Regular review should be held to see if the regime is in line with the situation on the ground, with an aim to then modify it if necessary, including easing or completely lifting sanctions. During negotiations on the draft, we on many occasions said that attempts to impose resolutions from outside on Malians have zero chance of success. However, in response to all of the arguments, the Council, through the efforts of Western councils, continued to ignore Bamako's views. Negotiations failed, and there had been a lot of work done before then to find compromise, with active involvement of all members of the Council. We would note the efforts of the delegation of the UAE, who, to the very last moment, demonstrated a constructive outlook and tried to find a compromise. However, as we moved towards the vote, the real motives of the Western members of the Council became clear. As it turned out, the principal points for them were not really extending the sanctions regime or supporting an effective fulfillment of the Algiers peace process. Indeed, with that in mind, we prepared an alternative draft resolution that took into the views not only of Malians but of the African members of the Council. The real reasons behind Paris and other Western delegations' attitudes was the aim to keep the panel of experts. And then the sponsors of the group said that this panel was necessary to observe the human rights situation in Mali, which is a function which is not far from being anything to do with the sanctions regime and nor relevant measures from the Security Council under the UN Charter. As we know, human rights, including in a country-specific context, are regularly discussed at the UN Human Rights Council. At that council, they have a procedure of the Universal Periodic Review, which is a lot to recommend it, which allows to the effectiveness of national policies to be discussed in this area. Indeed, the government of Mali, much like other states, have gone through this UPR process 4 times. The last one was in May this year. And they also report on their various human rights obligations. In addition, the human rights decision from 2018 was created. They created a post an independent expert on Mali human rights issues, and they report to the Council. As far as we know, the government of Mali never refused to cooperate with this expert and hosted them in Bamako, including in February of this year. A delegation of the US and EU member states who said that human rights is their priority, of course, fully aware of all of these mechanisms. They simply don't have any justification to. But as we see now, the existing mechanisms of the Human Rights Council and the batters from form of Metropolis is not as sufficient. The task has become more ambitious to exert political pressure on Bamako on human rights issues so that they don't allow Malians to move out of the sphere of their geopolitical influence. The panel of experts has indeed successfully addressed this task, and they've gone outside the framework of their mandate, and they have biased reports without the necessary cooperation with the Malian authorities, which has been an issue been drawn attention to many a times. What is that if yet another demonstration of a neo-colonial approach applicable to an independent state in the global south? No less important is the factor of efforts of the Western members of the Security Council to provoke Russia to use a veto. In response to calls for a compromise, Western delegations said directly, let's start with Russia vetoing it and then we'll find some common ground. That's what led to Western states in the Council to stop any productive work at the Council. I would like to turn to the countries of the Global South. Any country could be in Mali's position if we in the Council don't stop attempts of Western countries who are only concerned about how to preserve their geopolitical dominance and continue to use their former colonies. Don't forget that when today in this room we hear anti-Russian rhetoric from the United States and their allies. That when the French pen holders submitted to the UN Security Council a draft resolution ignoring our issues on this, we'd had no choice apart from to vote against it and submit an alternative draft text. Here we proposed a sensible compromise with a final extension of the sanctions regime of 1 year, but without the panel of experts. And like this compromise solution was there from the very beginning, long before the alternative document was put forward by us, and it was well known to the members of the Security Council. Until the last moment, there was a chance of success. In conclusion, I would like to underscore that we continue to hold our principled line on the use of the right to veto in the Security Council in order to make sure that this responsible organ of the UN takes balanced, responsible decisions in line with the aspirations of its peoples. We trust that in the future, sponsors of resolutions, rather than provoking unnecessary confrontation at the Security Council, will work as they should to find compromises, particularly when they are easy to achieve. Thank you very much indeed.